I've always been checking myself for prostate cancer. 2023, checked myself again, and the doctor said, doesn't look too good. We have to make an operation.
In September 2023, the world learned that Bjorn Borg, the man they called the Iceman, was facing his most brutal opponent yet, aggressive prostate cancer. The diagnosis sent shockwaves through the tennis community, but here's what most people don't realize. This wasn't even close to being the hardest battle of his life. The real story of Bjorn Borg is one of spectacular rises, devastating falls, and a collapse so complete that it nearly destroyed everything he'd built. This is the untold truth about the greatest player who walked away from it all. Imagine being 13 years old and picking up a tennis racket for the first time. Within months, you're destroying the country's best under-18 players, not beating them, destroying them. By 15, Bjorn Borg was representing Sweden in the Davis Cup, becoming the youngest player ever to do so. But it wasn't just his age that shocked people, it was the way he played. Long hair flowing, headband tight, two-handed backhand slicing through the air like nothing anyone had seen before. He moved like a dancer and hit like a freight train. The 1970s tennis scene had never witnessed anything like him. By the time he turned 20, Borg had already won his first French Open. Girls were literally flashing him at center court during Wimbledon matches. He wasn't just a tennis player anymore. He was a rock star, the Beatles of tennis. Everywhere he went, crowds mobbed him. Hotels had to sneak him through back entrances. Security couldn't control the chaos. And through it all, Borg remained completely emotionless on court. Stone-faced, ice-cold. The Iceman was born, and the world fell in love with someone who seemed untouchable. From 1974 to 1981, Borg dominated tennis in a way few athletes have ever dominated any sport. 6 French Open titles, 5 consecutive Wimbledon championships, 11 Grand Slam victories by age 26. He won 89% of his matches during that stretch. Think about that for a second. Almost 9 out of every 10 matches he won. Players were terrified to face him. Not because he was loud or intimidating, but because nothing seemed to faze him. You could scream, you could throw your racket, you could argue with the umpire. Borg would just stand there, expressionless, waiting to destroy you. But here's what nobody knew at the time. That calmness wasn't natural. It was manufactured out of pure necessity. As a young kid, Bjorn Borg was a nightmare on the tennis court. He'd swear at opponents, cheat on line calls, slam his racket into the ground after bad points. His tantrums were so bad that Swedish tennis officials gave his parents an ultimatum. Either he learns to control himself or he's banned from competitive tennis permanently. So at age 13, Borg made a decision that would define his entire career. He taught himself to suppress every emotion, every frustration, every disappointment, every flash of anger. He bottled it all up inside and showed the world nothing but a blank face. What looked like superhuman control was actually superhuman suppression. Years later, Borg admitted that after losing important matches, he couldn't speak for 3 days. Not wouldn't, couldn't. The emotional toll of keeping everything locked inside was so intense that his body would shut down. He'd sit in silence, processing the loss, alone, unable to communicate with anyone around him. His first wife described it as living with a ghost. He was there physically, but emotionally, he'd disappeared into some dark place nobody could reach. The Iceman persona that made him famous was slowly freezing him from the inside out. The cracks started showing in 1980 during what many still call the greatest tennis match ever played. Wimbledon final, Bjorn Borg versus John McEnroe. The contrast couldn't have been more perfect. Borg, the silent assassin in his headband and Fila outfit. McEnroe, the loud American brat who screamed at everyone and threw fits like a spoiled child. The match went back and forth for hours. In the 4th set tiebreak, they played out an 18-16 marathon that had the crowd at center court losing their minds. McEnroe saved 5 championship points. 5 times Borg was 1 shot away from his 5th straight Wimbledon title, and 5 times McEnroe fought him off. Borg eventually won that match in 5 sets, claiming his 5th consecutive Wimbledon crown. The crowd gave him a standing ovation that seemed to last forever. But something had shifted inside him during that 4th set tiebreak. Later, Borg would describe it as the beginning of the end. He'd given everything he had, reached into the deepest parts of his soul to win that match, and when it was over, he felt empty. hollow, like he'd used up some finite resource that could never be replenished. McEnroe had pushed him to a place he'd never been before, and what Borg found there terrified him. 1 year later, same stage, same opponent. 1981 Wimbledon final. This time, McEnroe won in 4 sets, breaking Borg's 5-year streak. After the match, Borg did something nobody expected. He went back to his hotel, sat by the pool with a couple of beers, and realized he felt absolutely nothing. No anger at losing, no sadness about the streak ending, no motivation to train harder or come back stronger, just emptiness. He later described it as one of the most disturbing moments of his life, finally understanding how miserable tennis had made him. The sport that gave him everything had also taken everything from him. At 26 years old, at the absolute peak of his powers, Bjorn Borg walked away from professional tennis. Just quit. The announcement shocked the entire sports world. This wasn't an injury retirement or a gradual fade into irrelevance. This was the #1 player in the world, still winning Grand Slams, just deciding he was done. In interviews at the time, Borg said he was nauseated by tennis. He couldn't stand to pick up a racket. The thought of another match, another tournament, another hotel room made him physically ill. For years, people speculated about what really happened. Was it burnout? Was it drugs? Was there something darker going on behind the scenes? The truth, as Borg would later admit, was simpler and sadder. He'd started playing competitive tennis at 13 and never stopped. No breaks, no off-seasons, no time to figure out who he was outside of being a tennis player. By 26, he'd been grinding for 13 straight years, and his mind and body had finally said enough. But here's the thing about walking away from the only identity you've ever known. You better have something else lined up because the fall can be brutal. And for Bjorn Borg, the fall was about to get a whole lot worse. During his playing career, Borg had launched a fashion line, the Bjorn Borg brand. Sportswear, casual clothes, all marketed with his name and image. He trusted some business partners to handle the operations while he focused on tennis. Seemed like a smart move at the time. Let the professionals handle the business while the athlete does what he does best. Except these professionals weren't looking out for Borg's interests. They were using his name to build their own wealth, making deals that benefited them while leaving Borg exposed to massive financial risk. The company collapsed in 1989, just completely fell apart. By 1990, Borg was forced to declare bankruptcy. The man who'd earned millions during his career suddenly owed over $1 million to various creditors. Swedish tax authorities came after him for $40,000 in back taxes. One of his former business partners, Lars Skark, even wrote a tell-all book claiming Borg had been heavily into drugs and partying during the business years. Borg denied all of it, but the damage was done. His reputation was in tatters, his bank accounts were empty, and he was living in Monte Carlo just to avoid Swedish tax laws. Things got so bad that by 1997, Borg was on the verge of declaring personal bankruptcy. Again, the 5-time Wimbledon champion was broke, depressed, and completely lost. His first marriage to Romanian tennis player Mariana Simeonescu had ended in 1984. She'd watched him spiral after retirement, unable to find purpose or direction, and eventually had to walk away. He had a son, Robin, with Swedish model Jannike Björling, which led to a messy custody battle. In September 1989, he married Italian rock singer Loredana Bertè, a relationship that would last until 1993 and be marked by constant media speculation about his well-being. In February 1989, something happened that Borg has never fully explained. He was found unconscious in their Milan apartment. The official story was food poisoning from a bad meal, but Italian media speculated it was something more serious, reporting that doctors pumped his stomach after what appeared to be an overdose of sedatives. Borg has consistently maintained it was exactly what he said: bad food, nothing more. 2 years later, in April 1991, during his comeback attempt, Loredana was also found unconscious in their Milan apartment in what appeared to be her own crisis. The speculation and whispers added another layer to the tragedy of his post-tennis life. Then, in what might be the most baffling decision of his entire life, Borg decided to attempt a comeback in 1991. At 35 years old, after a decade away from competitive tennis, he announced he was returning to the tour. And here's where it gets really weird. He grew his hair long again, put the headband back on, and insisted on using a wooden racket. In 1991, when everyone else had switched to modern graphite rackets years earlier, it was like watching someone try to race Formula One in a Model T Ford. The results were catastrophic. Borg played 12 matches in his comeback attempt between 1991 and 1993. He lost all 12 in the first round, every single time. For the first 9 matches, he didn't win a single set, not one. Players who would normally never beat someone of Borg's caliber were thrilled to draw him in tournaments. He became known as a guarantee to advance to the second round. It was painful to watch. This legend, this icon, getting absolutely demolished by journeyman players while using equipment from a different era. After the 12th loss in Moscow in November 1993, Borg finally gave up and retired for good. Years later, he admitted he never really understood why he came back, called it madness, a desperate attempt to recapture something that was already gone forever. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. In 2007, Borg licensed his name to a Dutch underwear company. The Bjorn Borg brand was relaunched, this time focused on undergarments and sportswear, and it exploded. Within a few years, the brand became the second biggest underwear company in Europe, right behind Calvin Klein. Borg had sold some of his shares in the early 2000s for 13.5 million euros, and the remaining stake continued to grow in value. The man who'd been bankrupt and broken in the 1990s was suddenly wealthy again. Not tennis money, but real, sustainable business money. He also found stability in his personal life. In 2002, he married Patricia Ostfeld, and they had a son named Leo. Unlike his previous relationships, this one seemed to work. Patricia helped him find balance, helped him build a life that wasn't defined solely by tennis achievements or business failures. Leo even started playing tennis, though without the pressure that had crushed his father decades earlier. Borg became a captain for the Laver Cup, working alongside his old rival, John McEnroe. The two men who'd battled so intensely in their primes were now friends, joking around and enjoying the game they'd both sacrificed so much for. Then came September 2023. The cancer diagnosis, aggressive prostate cancer. Borg went public with it, explaining that he'd noticed symptoms and gotten tested immediately. The diagnosis was serious, but he'd caught it early enough to fight. He underwent surgery in 2024 and announced later that year that he was in remission. In interviews, he compared the battle to playing a Wimbledon final. Every day, you show up and you fight. You don't think about yesterday or tomorrow, you focus on winning today. The Iceman, now in his late 60s, had finally learned to express emotion, to talk about his feelings, to admit when things were hard. Looking back at his tennis career, Borg now admits he has regrets. Walking away at 26 was a stupid decision, in his own words. He should have taken a break, recharged, and come back when he was ready. Instead, he cut himself off completely from the sport that had defined his entire existence, and it nearly destroyed him. The comeback attempt in 1991 was embarrassing, sure, but maybe it was necessary. Maybe he needed to fail spectacularly at tennis to finally let it go and move on with his life. The man who won 11 Grand Slams by age 26 never won another professional match after his retirement. The man who dominated tennis for nearly a decade couldn't win a single set in his comeback. The man who earned millions went bankrupt twice. The man who seemed emotionless on court was dying inside from suppressed trauma. The man who walked away from everything somehow found a way back to relevance and wealth through underwear, of all things. And the man who survived all of that is now surviving cancer, fighting it with the same determination he once brought to center court. Bjorn Borg's story isn't really about tennis. It's about what happens when you build your entire identity around one thing, and that one thing gets taken away. It's about the danger of suppressing emotions instead of processing them. It's about trusting the wrong people and paying a devastating price. It's about the courage it takes to admit you made mistakes and the strength required to rebuild from nothing. The Iceman melted, and what emerged from the thaw was something more human, more vulnerable, and ultimately more inspiring than the emotionless champion ever was. Today, Borg is still involved in tennis as a mentor and ambassador. He watches his son Leo play and offers advice without pressure. He works with the Laver Cup, celebrating the sport he once couldn't stand to think about. He manages his fashion brand, finally surrounding himself with trustworthy partners. And he fights his cancer battle one day at a time, refusing to let it define him the way tennis once did. The greatest player who walked away from everything learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't run from yourself. Eventually, you have to face the emotions you've been hiding, confront the mistakes you've made, and decide who you want to be when the crowd stops cheering. Bjorn Borg finally figured it out. It just took him 40 years and almost dying twice to get there.